Welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's check the top headlines first. United States is preparing to intercept more ships off the coast of Venezuela after an oil tanker was seized by the US just yesterday, further escalating the ongoing tension between both the countries. Ukrainian forces have reportedly retaken parts of the northeastern town of Kupiansk and several villages. Russian military had claimed that in November it had taken full control of the Kupiansk region. Amid the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, the European is all set to indefinitely freeze Russian central bank assets held in Europe. This will allow Ukraine to use the cash to defend itself against Russia. South Sudan has deployed troops to Sudan's Hegling oil field near the border to safeguard the strategic site after the RSF seized control. The admiral in charge of US military forces in Latin America, Alvin Jose, will reportedly retire 2 years early amid the Venezuela tension. Reports suggest that Jose has been pushed out by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. Gaza's 1.5 million displaced Palestinians are facing a new disaster as Storm Byron hits, flooding makeshift tents and causing deadly exposure, including the death of an infant amid 2 years of Israel's relentless war and mass displacement. In a major step to boost ties with China, India is all set to issue Chinese business visas within a month. In response, China has lauded the move as a positive action from India to facilitate people-to-people exchange. Reddit is challenging Australia's under-16 special media ban in the High Court, arguing the age restrictions unlawfully suppress political communication and raise privacy concerns. Now, viewers, according to reports, a new draft proposal under discussion would fast-track Ukraine into the European Union by early 2027, a move that would overhaul the bloc's usual years-long accession rules. Kyiv and Washington are now negotiating the plan with support from European Union officials, and President Zelenskyy says his team is preparing for a future inside the European Union. Such a deal could also pressure Hungary to lift its veto on Ukraine's membership bid, with Washington expected to play a decisive role, but the proposal remains highly contentious. Russia has shown no sign of accepting terms that fall outside its hardline demands, and senior Kremlin advisors say they expect to reject parts of the US plan once they see it. With talks intensifying in Europe this weekend, US officials say progress is close, but the negotiations are becoming increasingly complex. Now, joining me on this discussion is Mohammed Usman, who's an international relations expert, joins us live from Cairo. Usman, what do you think continue to be the sticking points? Of course, for European Union, it's crucial that Ukraine retains as much of its territory, particularly the Donbas region, but Russia is still advancing forward into the Ukrainian territory, now even claiming to have taken full control of Seversk and other neighboring regions today.
Thank you for having me, Kriti. Greetings to you and to your audience. It seems that the gaps between the Ukrainian and the Russian sides and the European sides as well with regards to a potential settlement in Ukraine are narrowing, yet they are still very wide at this point, because it seems that the main sticking point that remains as the pivotal source of disagreement between both sides is the idea of territorial concessions. That Russia insists that Ukraine evacuate the entirety of the Donbas or the Donetsk region. Ukraine still controls about 15% of the Donetsk region, and Russia insists that it should withdraw from it as part of any future settlement, while Ukraine prefers the freezing of the front line along the current lines. However, the other issues are not really as contentious, and it seems that there are disagreement. There are certain consensus or agreement with regards to them. For example, the issue of the European Union. Russia has been okay with Ukraine joining the European Union since the peace initiative of the March 2022, which would have saved us about 3 more years of war at this point. Russia has never been against the idea of Ukraine joining the European Union. However, Russia is staunchly opposed to the idea of Ukraine gaining membership of NATO or any military alliance. This has been something that this was the main cause actually of the current war, and it seems that they have went way past that. The Americans are completely vetoing the idea of Ukraine joining NATO, and many other members of NATO as well, like Hungary and Slovakia and others, are completely be synonymous or equivalent to Article 5 guarantees of the NATO Charter. So it seems now that the main sticking point is territorial concessions. Kriti, the issue of Ukrainian neutrality has been established. The issue of the membership of the European Union has also been established. The issue of even Russia retaining the vast majority of the lands it captured in Ukraine has also been established. The only sticking point is whether Ukraine should actually withdraw from the remaining lands they still control in the Donbas.
With Ukraine joining European Union, what are some of the challenges that will continue to remain for the country and some of the perks that it will get?
Well, according, of course, to EU standards, Ukraine is not really eligible for immediate EU membership. Now they are speaking that Ukraine should be admitted by 2027. The latest corruption scandals that came out of Ukraine do suggest that the Ukrainian political system is completely unequipped and unprepared for potential EU membership. However, this and also the Ukrainian economy is in no shape to be integrated into the overall European economy. However, it is a political decision at the end of the day, Kriti. If the decision makers within the EU, especially France and Germany, decide that it is okay to admit Ukraine at this point, then they will admit Ukraine.
All right, do stay on with us, Osman. There's some more information now that's coming in. A top Kremlin aide is saying that a ceasefire is only possible if Ukrainian troops withdraw from the Donbas, and Moscow insists the entire region belongs to Russia, dismissing Zelenskyy's suggestion of a referendum. This comes as Ukrainian President Zelenskyy reveals a new US proposal that would see Ukraine pull back from parts of Donetsk to form a special economic or demilitarized zone. Kyiv says any withdrawal must be mirrored by Russia, warning Moscow could use the area to advance again. Control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant remains another major hurdle. Zelenskyy says Russia should leave and Kyiv could share oversight with the US, though he doubts Moscow will agree. Zelenskyy also warns that Washington appears eager for a fast deal and may now be closer to Moscow's position. With Russian gains continuing, he says the negotiations remain fragile and unpredictable. And I now request Osman to join us back into the discussion here. Osman, these remarks from Zelenskyy are coming especially after Russia had said that it would take control of Donbas by diplomacy or by force. And as is evident and has been clear up until now, Russia is not one to stop the war until its demands are met. In that condition, how do you see Zelenskyy being able to retain Donbas?
Well, President Zelenskyy's statements reek of desperation, to be honest. I do not see any possibility of Ukraine actually retaining control of what remains of the Donbas. 85% of Donetsk already and the entirety of Lugansk has been captured by the Russian army over the past 3 years. Just lately, the strategic town of Seversk has fallen under Russian control. By the way, the Russians at the beginning of the war struggled to impose control over Seversk, and they could not. Now they easily stormed the town and they captured it. You know why, Kriti? Because Ukraine has no more manpower
Yeah.
to
Carry
plug
on the
all the
war.
gaps, basically, and they do not have enough resources. And Western support in general is dwindling. It is decreasing substantially. So if this war goes on
Yeah.
for another couple of years, Russia might actually storm Kyiv, not the entirety of the Donbas. So this is something that the Ukrainians need to keep in mind. Russia is biding for time because they know time is on their side, and within a year they can capture the Kramatorsk and Slovyansk and Dobropila and the other parts of Donetsk that are still beyond their control, and they are about and Liman as well. So the Russians know that they will get this eventually. They will either get it by a negotiated settlement or by military force, and then Ukraine will have to settle for a deal that is much worse. And this is what President Trump has warned of several times. So
All
I
right.
think that Kyiv and Europe should just see the writing on the wall and put an end to this painful war.
All right. Do stay on with me, Osman. Let's have our viewers some more information. Ukraine Special Forces have said that they've carried out a joint operation with a local resistance group to strike 2 Russian ships in the Caspian Sea. The vessels were reportedly carrying weapons and military equipment and are already sanctioned by the United States. Ukraine did not reveal how the ships were hit or the scale of the damage, but says the attack took place off the coast of Russia's Kalmyka region. Now, this comes days after Kyiv said its drones struck a Russian oil rig in the Caspian for the first time, halting production from about 20 wells. Officials say resistance operatives provided precise tracking details of the ship's movement and cargo. And Osman, I request you to join me back in the discussion here. Osman, now these are, of course, strikes, attacks, seizures of vessels that will continue as long as the war goes on. But I want to draw your attention to the statements that have come from Trump with regard to Ukraine and Zelenskyy. Trump clearly seems to be frustrated now with his patience running out. Not so much as with Kremlin as with Zelenskyy, and he's called for Zelenskyy to hold elections as soon as possible. With Ukraine now joining the European Union as per the latest draft proposal, how will that shift US policy towards Ukraine?
I think that the US policy will just remain the same. Trump's policy has been very consistent since the beginning. He wants to end this war by trying to apply pressure on both sides. He's applied pressure on the Russians and he applied pressure on the Ukrainians. He just happens to be applying more pressure on the Ukrainians because he believes that they are losing the war. And indeed, Kriti, they are losing the war. Ukraine might carry out outstanding attacks in the Caspian Sea or within the Russian depth against strategic Russian interests. These are very interesting and quite amazing attacks, very gallant, very brave, very sophisticated, and they are supported by the Europeans in carrying out these attacks. However, these attacks are also desperate. At the end of the day, they do not really hamper Russia's ability to produce oil or produce arms or Russia's access to the global economy. And Russia usually responds by massive missile strikes and drone strikes on Ukraine's infrastructure that is just devastating for the country. The country has been ravaged by the war. So actually, these attacks do not really make or create any strategic reshuffle on the battlefield that will actually help Ukraine. And the Americans do understand that. They do understand that continuing to support Ukraine endlessly in this war is a losing game, basically, and the West will lose more and more resources in such a huge war of attrition that basically favors Russia mathematically. So at the end of the day, the Americans are applying more pressure in order to end the war, and now they see that President Zelenskyy himself is becoming an obstacle, and this is why President Trump is basically pushing him and asking him to hold early elections, or actually overdue elections, since Ukraine's president's term has expired over a year ago. But under martial law, he has suspended elections. So basically, he's trying to pressure him in order to conveying a message, basically telling him that you might not be a legitimate president anymore. Maybe you should not be so stringent in your negotiating position. And this is why Ukraine President Zelensky is shifting forward and backwards, telling him that we have to hold a referendum here about the Donbas, we have to hold a referendum there, the will of the people this, the will of the people that.
Yeah.
So he's trying to maneuver as much as he can under such tremendous American pressure. But I think that the Americans will have their way at the end of the day.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Osman, for joining us and indulging in this conversation. For now, viewers, let's shift our focus. The European Union is looking determined to indefinitely freeze the central Russian bank's assets held in Europe. It claims that doing so would remove a big obstacle in using those funds to help Ukraine bolster its defense forces against Russia's ongoing war efforts. European Union member states are aiming to finalize a plan to freeze 210 billion euros, which is about 256 billion US dollars worth of Russian assets for an indefinite timeline as long as the war stretches. They say it would help prevent economic disruptions to the European Union economy, as the current system in place requires a rollover or renewal of the freeze in every 6 months with majority consensus. Moreover, countries like Hungary and Slovakia, which enjoy better relations with Russia, could hold back their vote at some point and force the European Union to return the money to Russia. But the latest plan to freeze Russian assets for an indefinite term is reportedly expected to reach through a qualified majority vote, which needs the support of at least 15 member states out of the 27 in total. Now, in response, Russia's central bank has said today that it will file a lawsuit against Belgium's depository Euroclear in the Moscow Arbitration Court to recover its losses. It is important to know that Euroclear holds the vast majority of frozen Russian assets, which is estimated to be around 193 billion euros. And I now request Martin Cyrus, who is an international affairs expert, to join us in the conversation here. Thank you, Martin, for joining us from Ecuador in this conversation. Martin, this is a tough question, the frozen Russian assets. Do you think Russia will allow such a use of its sovereign assets, especially when it's held in a country that's not keen on allowing the use of those assets for Ukraine?
Obviously, I think Russia is going to try by all means to avoid this situation. But the breach of trust and the breach of legality is really serious about the allegations from Germany that Russia has been using cyber attacks against the elections. Remember, in February 2025, Germany had the federal elections, and Russia allegedly interfered in that and also in the aerospace system. So I think these allegations are very serious, and Germany has all the right to try to counter and try to deterrence Russia from refraining to do this again by all means, if it means an economical war or retaining goods and budget from Russian banks.
All right. Well, do stay on with me, Martin. There's some news now coming in from Germany in regard to Russia. Because Germany has formally accused Russia of launching two major cyber attacks, one targeting its air traffic control system and another attempting to influence February's federal election. The attacks have been attributed to Russia's hacker collective Apt28, also known as Fancy Bear. In response, Germany has summoned the Russian ambassador and vowed to take counter measures, coordinating with the European allies. Listen in.
Wir beobachten seit geraumer Zeit eine massive Zunahme bedrohlicher hybrider Aktivitäten durch Russland. Diese reichen von Desinformationskampagnen über Spionage und Cyberattacken bis hin zu Sabotageversuchen. Das Ziel dieser russischen Cyber- und Desinformationsangriffe ist klar. Es geht darum, die Gesellschaft zu spalten, Misstrauen zu schüren, Ablehnung hervorzurufen und das Vertrauen in demokratische Institutionen zu schwächen. Diese gezielte Informationsmanipulation reiht sich ein in eine Vielzahl von Aktivitäten Russlands, die darauf abzielen, das Vertrauen in demokratische Institutionen und Prozesse in Deutschland zu untergraben. Russland bedroht damit ganz konkret unsere Sicherheit. nicht nur durch seinen Angriffskrieg gegen die Ukraine, sondern auch hier bei uns in Deutschland. Heute Vormittag haben wir daher den russischen Botschafter ins Auswärtige Amt einbestellt und klar aufgezeigt: Wir beobachten sehr genau, was Russland tut, und wir gehen dagegen vor. Russlands unzulässiges Handeln hat Konsequenzen.
The government has indicated plans for new individual sanctions against the Russian hybrid actors. Germany, a key supporter of Ukraine, has accused Russia of engaging in the so-called hybrid attacks since the Russia-Ukraine war began in 2022. And now I'd request Martin to join us back into the discussions here. Martin, what kind of response should we expect now from Russia on these allegations from Germany?
So as always, the status quo of Russia is basically denying every single action that they are accused for. So far, we haven't seen any response from the Russian embassy. They're going to keep silent and they will never admit what they did, but it has been widely reported that this is how Russia intelligence agency works, by infiltrating and then not taking responsibility of any breach of intelligence that they do. I think Russia will deny and will try to avoid any type of sanctions. But they know that the European Union right now is more united than ever with NATO and with the increase of the budget for security in the European Union and NATO. So I don't think they will try to deter Europe by using force.
But same kind of allegations had also come in from Germany the last year, and it warned of severe actions and consequences. We don't know what really happened after that, and it's a repeat of those claims. So where is this feud going to go on, and how can Germany really protect its cyber security space?
I think right now what Germany needs to do is to have a widely common cooperation with NATO and the European Union in intelligence terms. And I think obviously right now they don't want a war with Russia, even though they are absolutely for the Ukrainian cause. I think Germany will try to deter Russia with economical sanctions imposed by the European Union itself, and also by sabotaging any kind of commerce and by damaging Russian economical perspective. I think right now the situation is that Germany is not going to be working alone. They are going to strengthen their relations with their neighbors in the European Union.
All right. I thank you, Martin, for joining me in this discussion, and I'd let you go with that. Viewers, Iraq's former President Barham Salih has now been named the next High Commissioner for Refugees, breaking with the tradition of appointing leaders from major donor countries. Salih's 5-year term will begin on January 1 next year, as confirmed by a letter from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Salih, who is an engineer from Iraq's Kurdish region, replaces Filippo Grandi of Italy, who has held the position since 2016. The appointment is subject to approval by the UNHCR's Executive Committee. Salih takes on the role at a time when global displacement is at record highs, with funding from traditional Western donors such as the US being reduced. And moving on to now some news from France, 50 farmers have been mobilized by the Coordination Rurale and Confédération Paysanne trade unions, which are currently blocking the entrance to the Asian Chamber of Agriculture in southern France. Their actions are intended to show support for livestock breeders in Ariège who are affected by the contagious lumpy skin disease. Jose Perret, the president of Coordination Rurale 4, has sharply criticized the government by stating that the government despises farmers, as he believes a protest movement is starting again. Let's hear some comments.
On s'en rend pas compte, ce gouvernement nous méprise. Quand je vois hier ce qui s'est passé en Ariège, c'était méprisant, quoi. Pour les moyens qu'ils ont mis pour abattre un troupeau dont seule une vache était malade. Enfin, j'ai pas de mots. Je trouve ça, on n'a pas de mots. Moi, je suis revenu, j'arrive d'Ariège, là, je suis rentré à 3h du matin, et je trouve ça complètement terrifiant ce qui s'est passé, quoi. Aujourd'hui, on devait avoir un rendez-vous.
Moving on, viewers, some news from Poland, where Polish border guards discover a fourth tunnel under the Poland-Belarus border near Narewka today, used by over 180 migrants to cross illegally. Authorities detained more than 130 people and arrest two suspected drivers, a 69-year-old Polish man and a 49-year-old Lithuanian, while searches for remaining migrants continue. The 1.5-meter high tunnel runs several dozens meters beneath the border barrier, with its entrance hidden in the Belarusian forest and its exit just 10 meters from the Polish side. Most of the intercepted migrants came from Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal and Bangladesh. Border guards, soldiers and police, assisted by sniffer dogs and electronic monitoring systems, secure the area and track remaining migrants. Officials say the discovery highlights the effectiveness of physical barriers and surveillance in preventing illegal crossings along the border. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.